Inequality report, and it shows the country produced a record 43 Australian billionaires last year, 10 more than during the previous 12 months. The charity says the figures show the top 1% of Australians continue to own more wealth than the bottom 70% combined. Here's Dr. Helen Zoki, Oxfarm Australia's Chief Executive. Hi Helen. So there were nearly a third more billionaires created in Australia last year. In which industries, and what are the reasons behind that increase, do you think?
Well, we can see the concentration of wealth, and it's spread across a range of industries, including mining, real estate and so on. The issue, I think, is the concern about the widening gap between the rich and the poor. When we see this gap widening, we actually see that people get trapped in a poverty cycle, and we've taken a particular focus on women and also Australia's First Nations people in this report, and there are some very concerning trends there. We still fail to actually address the gender pay gap, and this is something that in Australia, let alone globally, we've been working on for decades. And alarmingly, the report also shows that for the bottom poorest 25% in the Australian community, then our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are the largest proportion of that compared with non-Indigenous poor. So there's some work to be done to really look at what's happening in Australia, let alone what's happening globally. So
what about the argument, Helen, that increasing numbers of wealthy people are a good thing? It shows the economy is going well. It's a good place to do business, which will or should benefit the whole population.
Well, I think there's a very live debate around the taxation system, and our concern is that the taxation system brings benefits for all people and is fair. And that really means that we need a number of components to that, one of which is, the most important of which is transparency. We have consistently called for the Australian government to continue to build its tax system to be more transparent. One of the things that we find would be really helpful in this regard is where multinational companies are operating in multiple jurisdictions, that they actually do country by country reporting. We also think in Australia we need to probably look much more actively at a women's budget to actually look at the impact of facilitating gender equity. And of course, there's a very live debate around protection and services for our First Nations people and how effective they are. And the snapshot that we've taken looking at Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people shows that we're just not making the advances that we should be, even just looking at a basic measure like infant mortality rates. So the big issue is, how do we get a fair taxation system and one that ensures that where wealth is generated, the taxes are paid.
And how does this latest survey, Helen, compare with what's been happening in the past in terms of wealth inequality? What's the ongoing trend?
Well, globally, what we've seen is that the top richest group have had a 12% increase in their growth. Then that compares with the poorest cohorts across the globe. So we're talking about $3.8 billion and 3.8 billion people, and collectively they've seen a reduction in their wealth of 11%. So this trend is happening globally, and again the concern is that whilst there is this concentration of wealth, there is the limitation on governments to actually invest in basic services that help lift people out of poverty. We've seen major advances globally where we have seen a decline in the number of people who live below the poverty line, but the problem is the developments aren't sufficient. So there is such a huge number of people who are living just above the poverty line, but still not being able to operate with a living wage, and who are surviving very much on a day-to-day basis in both wealthy countries and in poor countries across the world. So our world leaders, our business leaders are meeting in Davos this week, the World Economic Forum annual summit, and this message has been taken to Davos to say we need to look at global tax reform, much greater transparency, and ensuring that tax avoidance and tax minimisation isn't continued at the same rate, which actually deprives governments of investment in basic protections for people who are living in poverty.
Dr. Helen Zoki, thank you.
Thank you.